Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Solvable Mysteries podcast. I'm joined by Glenn Heikov. Yo, man, how are you feeling this Friday evening for you, man?
Whew, it's been a long week. Yeah, no, I'm ready here. I think probably all of us are ready for a little break. So this was interesting. This was interesting because we were going back to like what basically Central Europe, Northern Europe. Um, but the case was crazy, and I couldn't help but think it was like a combination of like a horror film and like a Scorsese film. You
Yeah,
know? Yeah.
I see what you mean because this is one of the craziest cases I've seen in recent times. And you know what it is? It's kind of interesting how it's only publicized in Poland. I would assume a case like this would get pushed out into the international waters a little bit here, but it hasn't. So I think we're the first ones who will be probably talking about this. Using the English language for the English speaking audience for sure. So I don't even know how to word this week's case. We'll probably just gonna end up calling it something like the Polish cannibals of the early 2000s or something like that. I'm not even sure how to describe this case, but the general gist of what we're gonna be talking about here is that someone on Reddit posted a really interesting write up of a bizarre Polish cannibalistic murder case that apparently has no body, not even a victim's name, but it does have a man that we only can refer to at this point as Robert M. because his last name is being held by, I think, the court system in Poland because the trials are still ongoing. But apparently, he has already been sentenced to 25 years in prison because apparently he was the sole leader of a group of five guys who apparently took a guy who owned Robert some money back in, I think, 2002, and then they killed him, apparently uh, cut his head off eventually, butchered him, ate his body parts, stashed some of the body parts for themselves to bring back home. The rest of his body was thrown into a big lake. The lake has been searched. There was no body found, but the divers, they said that the I mean the ground layer, you know what I mean, of the lake was very muddy, and we can't say for certain that no body is actually stashed there. So this is a very bizarre case. I definitely want to get into it, and the longer that I've been thinking about this Polish cannibal case, I think I am now leaning towards a certain line of thinking. I can't wait to jump into it. Can't wait to jump into the details of this week's case. Before we jump into, I guess, the timeline, well, the very vague timeline that we've managed to uncover in this case. Also, a quick note: there's going to be a lot of Polish names here. So we might get some Polish names incorrect, and I know that we have some listeners from Poland. So immediately want to apologize if we get some words incorrectly, because some of these names are pretty difficult to spell for not native Polish speakers. So yeah, dude. Before we jump into it, anything you want to add to this case? Maybe some opinions before we start.
Yeah, I mean it was so fascinating because there's one part of this whole narrative, if it's true, that was so much like one of my favorite movies, or I guess any kind of movie where there's a big organized crime showdown. So that's what I kept on thinking about when I heard about this story. I'll also say in terms of you mentioned, um, you know, muddy muddy Polish lakes. I mean, gosh, I've seen stuff on Reddit and other sites where they're like still pulling out tanks from World War II that were like deep in the mud. You
Whoa.
know what I mean? Yeah, yeah, like huge tanks, right? That just sunk to the bottom of this deep mud, during all the many battles that were across that part of Europe between, Soviet Union and Germany. And yeah. yeah, they'll find they're like, oh yeah, we think there might be a tank right here, and then they pull out like this huge tank.
Whoa,
Like that was like 20 feet under the mud. So,
Jesus.
yeah, I'm not totally surprised. It might be hard to find something in one of those places.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's a good point, man. Maybe there is a body somewhere down in the lake of Osijek. The lake is Osijek. So immediately I start with the more difficult names, words to pronounce in Polish. Now, jumping to the story for everyone. So, the story begins very vaguely with like very uncertain circumstances. By the way, before we jump into it, I just want to quickly note that everything that I'm talking about here is actually real. Like, we're not sure if the cannibalism did take place, but like, it's a real case proceeding. Like, it's a real thing. If you type in Polish cannibals and like Polish, there will be articles. Many Polish news outlets are talking about this, so it's a real thing. So apparently the story begins in 2017 when a letter, but one, now this is immediately where the vagueness begins because we don't really know if it was an email or it was an actual letter, but I think more news outlets stated that it was in fact an email, so I will be more inclined to think that this was an email. In 2017 this email was sent to Chojny City Police Station by a man contending to be Zbigniew B. We don't know his last name, just his name is Zbigniew, who admitted in this email to be part of an underreported crime from 2002. Apparently, this crime remained a secret until 2017, so a secret for 15 years until Zbigniew B apparently emailed this letter to the police station in one of the local towns in Poland stating that he was part of this crime. Now, in this letter, Zbigniew described names as well as details of this crime that had taken place 15 years ago. According to this letter or email, five friends, and we have their names, but we don't have their last names. So Robert M., Janusz S., Sylvester B., Zbigniew B., as well as Rafal O., met together to drink at a fish bar in a small town of Lasko in 2002. Now, at some point during the evening, when all five men were pretty drunk, an unidentified man entered the bar. Now, Robert M. recognized this man as someone who had owed him money. Now, he then proceeded to kick this man out of the bar, and once he was out of the bar, Robert M. started to beat him up, and then he took him and threw him at the back of the trunk of Zbigniew B's car. So let's remember, Zbigniew B is the man who is writing all of these details in this email. Now, all of the men got inside of the car and drove to a nearby lake called Osijek. So really quickly on the Google map for everyone, we have the Osijek map right here, the Osijek lake right here. This is Lasko. So just to give like some context for our YouTube viewers. Now, Zbigniew B then took the man out of the trunk of his car. Then he started to batter him. At some point, Robert lit a campfire, like close to that Osijek lake, right? And then he looked at Zbigniew and said, quote, "You know what to do now." And then Zbigniew apparently started to slash the unidentified man's throat, eventually chopping his head off completely. After that, Zbigniew took the victim's clothes off, started gutting him, cut the body into five big chunks of meat, probably head, torso, limbs, etc., etc. Other men put these meat chunks on sticks and baked over the campfire, and they then proceeded to consume some of this meat. Now, afterwards, Robert M. got the remaining body parts inside a bag, put them inside of a bag, filled the bag with some rocks. Then he took, I think, Zbignev's, or maybe he was the owner of an inflatable boat. So he took the boat. He then apparently paddled his way to the middle of Osiek Lake, and he threw the bag in the water. Now, the bag was filled with rocks, so I think that was to make sure that the bag with the body parts would sink in Osiek Lake, essentially. Now, apparently they slept, like camped or something like that, because the next morning the men took all of the remaining meat to their homes. Now, one of the men, Rafal O, even offered some of this human meat to his flatmate, saying it's, quote, rabbit's meat. Now, the flatmate didn't like the taste, and he knew definitely that this was not a rabbit, so instead, I think they just fed it to their dog, which is kind of crazy. Now, in 2017, right after receiving this letter, police created a team codenamed Lecter and decided to investigate these allegations. So, dude, your take on the general gist of this crazy story?
When I just pick and choose, the part with the roommate kind of made me laugh a little bit because it was like, I mean, who knows what other kind of creepo stuff this Rafal guy was Rafal, right?
Yeah.
Like who knows what else he had pulled in the past, where the roommate's like, hey, I don't know if I like your rabbit meat. I mean, I don't know if you like would want to trust this guy to take any meat from him. I mean, nobody would think you would do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he was like, yeah, you know what? No thanks. I wonder if afterwards the roommate was like, wow, I really dodged a bullet, with
Yeah.
this, get out of this situation. Though I guess this was supposed to be a long time ago, so I guess maybe, um, you know, there was still a lot of danger. Let's see. So, um, yeah, that was so. I guess when I said it earlier, it reminds me of a Scorsese movie. Well, it reminds me of like Goodfellas. I mean, the movie came out in the '80s, so I don't think there's any spoiler alert. But when Joe Pesci's character kills Billy Bats, who's like a kind of an affiliated mobster. Anyway, the whole thing of like pushing the guy in the trunk and like sort of
Yeah.
brutalizing the person, you know what I mean? And then I think they do actually like take him apart later,
Mm.
when they have to move his body. But yeah, so I mean, from that point of view, it sounded like an organized crime thing, right? Didn't it? Almost like like, all the elements were there, like hanging out in a bar. Someone comes in and owes them money. They proceed to beat the crap out of this guy, and nobody calls the cops and kidnap him. And then they take him into the woods, and then it's like
Mm-hmm.
some kind of semi-routine like execution. Um, what I don't get is, if he owes you money, why kill him? He can't pay you back, right?
And also, why eat the body? That's also an interesting touch to the story.
That might be the number one question, right? Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm blowing right past that, but yeah, that aspect of it. I mean, just to take a pause for a second.
Yeah.
Does anything like this ever happen in Lithuania?
No, not really. Even though, like, I would assume some people would think that in these like smaller countries, like wacky stuff like this may be like a a normal thing almost. But no, not really. I don't recall anything like this, to be honest.
I mean, the only thing I would say is during the war, but I mean World War II. Um, so when I was doing research on this topic, it's like kind of situations like that are where the normal rules fly out the window. So that was because like, I mean, between I guess World War II and then the stuff that happened with the Soviet government, either intentionally or incompetently running things. There was massive starvation where like some certain countries, like in Ukraine and probably other places nearby to where you are, either during the war or during the famines that came afterwards, um, I mean, people were getting prosecuted. People were becoming cannibals because that was the only way you could live in some of the situations. And then there were apparently some prosecutions after the war. So that's interesting because I know in your notes it's going to relate to how this kind of falls in terms of, let's say, the the legal system for Poland. Whether this is normal or not. But yeah, at one point it was like really kind of an embarrassing thing because it happens. I mean, it's an unfortunate reality when you have too many people and nothing to eat. Um, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that being said, in the U.S., the only cannibalism cases I've heard, everyone thinks of like Jeffrey Dahmer, right? But it's almost always somebody, I guess, that has some kind of mental malfunction,
Mm.
right? But and I guess this is something that's worth probably elaborating more at some point. That's not necessarily the case historically and for the rest of the world. So cannibalism can mean something different, and it almost makes you wonder if this was sort of like a weird way of Poland being similar to some of those other parts of the world in terms of what context this cannibalism happened, because nobody's starving to death in Poland, right?
No, no, no. Especially like in the 2000s, that's not what's happening there. Um, but the case is definitely interesting. I think we want to jump to what happened next, right? Because like the police has this case on their hands. But as I've said, the victim, uh, the alleged victim, is a mystery. No one knows who this victim is. It's all like everything, like the court proceedings, etc., etc. They're all based on Zbigniew B's email. But this is where a huge turn in this case happened next. So, what I'm actually talking about is that shortly after creating this codename Lecter team, in reference to probably Hannibal Lecter, like from what I've read, the Polish, they like to name their special investigative teams like really like funny names for some reason, right? Now this team found that Zbigniew B, the man who apparently sent this email, was already dead for 6 months at the time of the email being sent. So Zbigniew B, the man who laid out this story, he was already dead, okay? And also, apparently, from what I've read, it is not known to this day who sent the email. So I would assume if this was an email, it was probably a random Gmail account who sent the email, but it had like initials or something like that at the end of the email, like stating that I'm Zbigniew or something like that. You know what I mean? Or if it was a real physical letter, then it's even easier to hide your like identity, I think. So, what do you make of that? So, we don't know who sent this email.
That's so weird because, yeah, I mean that, though you mentioned with the physical mail, the thing about physical mail is maybe it has fingerprints or some kind or some other kind of DNA traces from the person, like on the envelope from licking it shut. Um, so on that, you know what I mean? Like in some ways, computer stuff used to be able to kind of hide you. And for some people that really know what they're doing, I guess it can. I just can't help but wonder they have no way of asking the email provider, like, well, where did this email come from? What was the path it took um, to hit your email servers? If there was any way to trace that back, because sometimes that information is present depending on how the person accesses the internet. I can't help but wonder if the guy was okay. So if the guy's dead already, just let me make sure everybody's got their dates right. Not, I mean, obviously not you, but the people
Yes, yes.
we've run into this before, where sometimes it seems like investigatorial incompetence. So it'd just be good to know that they know that for sure. What if someone accessed this guy's property and the computer's still plugged in and nobody's taking ownership over it, or a family member who
Mhm.
is living with them, and they're just like, oh, I'm just gonna, I went through the emails and I found something or I remembered something and just sent it off.
So would the family members of Zbigniew would try to expose the crime
Yeah,
intentionally?
that's what I can't help but wonder if somebody's feeling guilty, someone's feeling bad, maybe even somebody that now that Zbignev's dead, they're like, well, I mean, I never liked your friends, so I'm going to do whatever I can to get not really thinking out
Right.
the full ramifications of that action because it could boomerang on you, right?
Exactly.
So that's but and sometimes people don't think that out
Right.
too clearly.
I think, well, I'm not sure if it seemed like it's a rural town in Poland where this is all happening. So I would assume Zbigniew is not necessarily very tech savvy. But an idea I had is maybe he was a dying man because I think the Reddit poster in one of the comments he said that he believes that Zbigniew died of natural causes. So he wasn't like killed or there wasn't any foul play involved in Zbignev's death. He was just, like an older man who just died, essentially. And then I was thinking maybe he was a dying man and he knew he was dying. Maybe he somehow like had like an alert or something like that where like he knew around the time when he would die, so he wrote the email, I would assume, and then he maybe set the date of this email to be sent, like maybe 6 months in advance. That's like an idea I had, but at the same time, like it seems like I wouldn't even know how to do that. I would have to like Google to see if that's even possible. So I'm not sure if like an older individual in like rural Poland would be like able to come up with this scheme. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a good thought. I think you're on the right track though, because even if it wasn't intentional, I mean, by the way, especially kind of an older person who's not like up to date with like the how their software works on their email program or something. I've had emails get stuck when I've used Thunderbird.
Oh yeah.
One of my workplaces, um, for various reasons, we use Thunderbird pretty often, which is kind of like this interesting open source thing. But like I've had emails like not just go out. I used to see this with other stuff too, Outlook and everything else. Sometimes you would send an email and then it would just sit there in the outbox, and you would have to. I don't know if you remember this. At one point, some of the this is before you're born probably, or when you were really young. Some of the you would have like instead of having browser based email, a lot of people still had like like Thunderbird type stuff, but like you know
Oh yeah.
just you know what I'm talking about, like an email client. So like those things would do squirrely stuff like that all the time, or they would have weird settings where like they would only check for mail every X number of seconds or minutes or whatever it was, as if it takes any real effort now. But back in the pre broadband days,
Yeah.
people were more stingy with what their computer did with information. So yeah, that's a thought. Or once again, somebody finds the draft. Doesn't have to be my family member scenario, but somebody accesses the computer or the account. If it's a web-based account, they find a draft and they just fill in the two and hit send.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. Um, by the way, for everyone who's watching this on the YouTube, what we have on right now is basically some TV station from the Polish, uh, from Poland. I'm sorry, and they're kind of like doing a case. It seemed like the judge was like kind of smiling, and it's all like a big joke a little bit. You know what I mean? Like it's a good time. Everyone's like having a good time. So kind of really is a relaxed mood in the court, which is kind of unusual now. I have some more details because now some more really creepy things will start happening. So, now when police went and raided the homes of the other four men, because let's remember there were five people involved allegedly in this incident, but Zbigniew was already passed away at that point, so there were only four people left living. And when police raided the homes of these four men, the men were completely surprised, and they initially denied all of the allegations against them. Now, police in Poland, they did something very smart. They kind of wiretapped the four men's phones. Not sure how they were able to do that, but allegedly they found out that the four men were contacting each other and conspiring together to say nothing to police. Now, eventually, the four men were interrogated based on these wire-tapped conversations, right? And the four men claimed that the wire-tapped conversations were about some other victimless car accident a few years prior, which they didn't report because the driver didn't have a driver's license. So I have some more intel on this. During the interrogation, Robert M., the main, the leader of that group of men who apparently killed and ate, the unidentified man explained to the police that that the recorded conversations through wiretapping were not about a murder, but about a car rollover that took place a few years ago. When Robert M. was driving from Zielona Góra, which is a town in Poland, together with Miroslav S. and Janusz S., as well as the case was not reported to police back then because the driver of this vehicle, Janusz S., did not have a driver's license. Now, investigators confirmed that this traffic accident did take place. It wasn't made up, it was a real traffic accident. But investigators didn't believe these explanations, and their quote is, quote, recorded conversations coincided with police interrogations on the death of an unknown man, and at the time of the car accident event, the other participants of the alleged murder back in 2002 did not participate. So there was no reason for the other men to conspire to not talk to the police. Now, man, did I make any sense here? So to
Yeah.
so really to cap it off, police wiretap the phones of four men, and they all conspire not to talk about anything to the cops, but then they explain to the cops that, oh, it's about a traffic accident, but not all of the four men out of this conversation were involved in the traffic accident. So why would all four of them conspire not to talk to police about some simple traffic accident, when some of them didn't even take place in this traffic accident? So the police were definitely raising their eyebrows. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the whole thing's ridiculous. I mean, it's almost like a joke how those guys thought that excuse would even work. Do you? I mean, if these guys do the kind of stuff they're accused of, or are anywhere in the neighborhood of like organized crime or local tough guys, would they be really crapping their pants about some accident they didn't report? That doesn't make any sense. I'm sure those guys do stuff like that every week. I mean, or every or a couple times a year or something. I'm sure their cars are all dinged up, and they've had like they really think they're getting all this police attention because of a car accident, as
Yeah.
if anybody really, what I mean. I mean, I don't know. Am I out of line? I mean,
No, no,
is it
correct.
in that part of the world? Do people really like care that much about car accidents that they would think the whole weight of the law was going to come down on them?
No, not at all. Especially in these rural towns in my part of
It's a lot
Europe.
of drinking and stuff, right? And people
Dude,
drink and drive all the time, right?
kids are driving cars, like 14-year-olds are
Yeah.
like speeding because these like rural roads, they don't have any police presence. You just do whatever you want. No one really cares. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. So yeah, from that point of view, the cops must have been like even like semi insulted.
Yeah.
They're like, "Come on, dude! Like once again, yeah, I'm kind of curious. I'd like to know about the logistics of what they did because I mean, the way you describe it now, to me, that just sounds like they went to the cell phone companies and were like, "Here's a warrant. Let us, like redirect the call so we can tap in." But before, when I read it, I was thinking it sounded more like something like Operation Paperclip, where the U.S. government, basically kidnapped all those German scientists at the end of the war that would have gone to, court for war crimes, and then when we had them living in like special little houses that were like kind of like prisoner houses, but for like prisoners that we cared about, we had microphones everywhere, so we were listening in to all these German scientists talk to each other about like what they were and weren't going to talk about, like just kind of hearing the little secrets, right?
Yeah.
These guys that worked. So it kind of reminded me of that. I was like, huh, that's like a nice. I mean, and I'm sure Polish law is different than U.S. law about that kind of stuff, surveillance and use. I mean, in the U.S., for context, you have to get like a warrant. There's a TV series called The Wire. That's a great um, kind of intro to the topic. But yeah, it's a big pain. And then how do you do it without getting detected? So that's why I thought,
Yeah.
well, turning on this, just you know what I mean, just turning the key on the cell phones with the cell phone companies. That's pretty easy to do as long as nobody blabs.
Yeah, I see. Because they really just brushed it off as nothing in these stories, but it is logistically pretty, like it's a significant portion of the investigation right now. Police, they tried tracking down Zbigniew B's car because let's remember, apparently the unidentified man was kept in Zbigniew's trunk. So if they locate the car, maybe they can look at the trunk and see if there's any DNA left, right? But they couldn't really locate it. They also tried locating the inflatable boat allegedly used to dispose of the body in the middle of the Osiek Lake, right? But they couldn't really find that as well. Now, well, I will really quickly jump back to that inflatable boat. Apparently, they did find it, but they did find it, and apparently, it was bought in 2011. So there was no way it could have been used to commit a crime in 2002, because it was, essentially bought like what, 9 years after the murder, alleged murder, even took place. Now, the car apparently, Zbignev's car apparently was sold for scrap years ago. And yeah, as I've said, the only inflatable boat they found had some traces of blood, but the boat was bought in early 2010s. But now they did find some blood, but apparently we don't have any more information on what kind of blood. So I was kind of curious what kind of a blood could there be, but I mean, I guess we'll never know. Now, the lake had been searched using divers and scanners, but nothing was found. However, the bottom of the lake is very muddy, so it's difficult to be certain if no body does, in fact, lay on the surface of that lake. Now, I have some more details about the search without result, and here's the quote from, I think, the news stations. No object with features resembling a human body or its remains and other objects that could be related to the proceedings in question were found. The indictment wrote, okay. However, it was added that, quote, the bottom of the lake is very muddy and unstable, and therefore it cannot be ruled out that a human body still remains deep in that lake. So we have this lake on the map, man. I'm curious. We don't really have we do have a few Google Street View things or something like that. So this is the lake in question, man. As you can see, in the summer, it has it's almost like a swimming area. Now, you see that little line right here? I know what these lines are. These are like the things that are supposed to prevent people from crossing over the line. So I think these people are like breaking the law, right? by crossing over this line because it gets very deep very fast. So what this says that this lake is probably very very deep. So as you can see, this is the type of a lake that you cannot drain, right? Like your thoughts, like for me personally, when I look at this lake now, the Osiak Lake, it's gigantic. Well, it's not really gigantic compared to some other lakes, of course, but if you're trying to locate a body in this lake, like, I'm not sure that, like, it's a very difficult task, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the lens is probably macroing a little bit, so it is probably stretching the horizon out to make it look a little bigger. But I mean, yeah, to your point, um, some of these lakes get extremely deep. You don't know what's making stuff kind of go up and down. I also wonder. I know you said you can't drain this lake, right? You can't drain it. I wonder if anything drains out of it? Like, I wonder if any rivers, um,
Right.
like a river pours into it to fill it. Does anything pour out on the other side as it's being filled?
I'm not
Do you
really
know what I mean?
I'm not really sure. I'm looking at it. It doesn't look like it has any sort of outage, if that's even a real word. If you know what I mean. Like, it doesn't look
Yeah,
like
like
it's,
outlet. I'm
yeah.
just kind of curious. I mean, something's feeding it, obviously, to replenish it. But the only reason why I asked that is,
Yeah.
the assumption that any body or anything you put in there is going to stay in one place. But I don't know if there's a lot of like water flow going through that lake. I wonder if it's possible that something could get pushed, like if water's coming in one end, if it gets pushed out the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely crazy. Um, so yeah, this is the Osek Lake. We just took a little bit of a uh, look at it. You know what I mean? By the way, all of these other areas that we can see on the map, they're really hard to get a hold of because, really quickly, Szczecin is the biggest town and it's the most northern town in the story. This is where Robert M. worked as a welder in a shipyard at the time of his arrest in 2017. This is Chojno, the town that it's like Chojno's police station received Zbigniew B's email, but we don't know who wrote the email because Zbigniew B was dead at that point, right? So this is Lasko, the town with the fish bar, where the men were drinking and ran into the man that owed money to Robert M. They beat him outside of Lasko, and they drove to like somewhere around Osiak Lake. This is where they killed him, and then they proceeded to, essentially, it seems like cannibalize the unidentified man's body and stash it. Now, I see that these are like farmlands. Now, landscapes could have definitely been different back in 2002, but it seems like it would be a smart move for the individuals to probably, if they're gonna stash the body, they would probably do it in this portion of the lake, right? Because this portion of the lake has more woods, and it's like you're not gonna just go into someone's field and start eating a body. You know what I mean? I would definitely assume it happened somewhere in this portion of the lake, the smaller, more wooded portion of the lake.
Plus, they lit a fire, right? So that's
Yeah,
something that like you said you wouldn't want to do on someone else's land in like a really obvious way, unless you could hide it somewhere, like you said, with maybe some trees.
yeah. Because look, dude, this scenery looks like, you could definitely pull something like that off. Not necessarily the cannibalism part, but at least a murder and then stashing of a body. Like, this looks like an ideal place.
Oh yeah, I mean, as long as he doesn't wash up on the shore of anybody's farm. I mean, how would you ever find someone that was, I guess, weighted down, or even buried just right off of the shore somewhere, if it's not, on a field that's being plowed?
Exactly. Let's quickly jump back to the story. Um, what I have next is that in 2017, a local resident of the general area found a human skull um, in another nearby lake. I think the lake was Gorn Lake. So this is a smaller Gorn Lake, and it's pretty close to actually a pretty well developed little town here in Poland. And it's pretty crazy because the skull that was found in this town. Now, for everyone who's listening to this, I just want to quickly set the stage. This skull right here was found in another town, like way, like not necessarily a far distance away, but still a skull was found in some lake, which is always interesting, but that happens, right? Now police couldn't really identify who the skull belonged to, but apparently their estimation was that it probably belonged to a person who was between the ages of 45 to 55 years of age, and it could have been a woman, or if it was a man, then the man was very slim because the skull was pretty slim. So apparently they can only estimate the age range, and that the skull belonged to a slimmer person. And this man apparently died more than 10 years ago. So it would essentially match the story of what Zbigniew B said in his emails, but he was very detailed with names and details, etc., etc. But I mean, if someone is that detailed, would they really mess up the lake? You know what I mean? Like, oh, sorry guys, I typed in the wrong lake. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm trying to say here? Like, would you mess up the
Yeah,
lake?
yeah. I mean, true. Unless the person's in such an advanced state of bad mental health or alcoholism, they're getting stuff mixed up. Um, people do. People's minds do change key details of stories um, after the fact. But I do. I don't know. I gotta wonder. Like, here's the one thing when they said they gave like a lower limit, so more than 10 years, but they didn't say that. You know what I mean? I took it to be at least 10 years, but I didn't know that that didn't mean like 50 or 70. So
Yeah,
once again, I know I'm making reference to the war again, but there's a lot of, unfortunately, there's been a lot of blood spilled across, these parts of Europe in the past, let's say, century to 2 centuries. Why couldn't that just be the skull of somebody from the war?
yeah, exactly. If that's perfectly
If that's
plausible.
possible, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If the age, now that would be where it would be nice if they were able to give us a better window, right? To say like between 10 and 20 years ago, okay, well that's more plausible then.
Yeah, if it's like from the you know early 20th century, then it doesn't really connect to this case at all, right? Now, police also searched all the missing person cases in this region at the time of the crime taking place, but nothing meaningful was found. They also didn't find anything in regards to Robert M. himself or his personal grudges or people who owed him money or anyone that he would want to cannibalize and murder, for instance. Because apparently he had well, I'm not sure about his record, but there wasn't anything crazy like that, right? Now, shortly after the interrogation of the men, Rafal O, the same guy who allegedly brought human meat to his flatmate and then they fed it to the dog. Now, this man admitted his guilt, and this is where things started going down for everyone involved in this case. Now, a psychiatric evaluation determined that Rafal O had a quote, mild mental retardation and a memory impairment, as well as Rafal was addicted to alcohol. He was an alcoholic. So, the judge took this into consideration, but the judge didn't exclude Rafal O's testimony. However, Rafal had no clue about the identity of the victim. So get a load of this guy, man. He testifies that it did happen. He has some sort of mental impairments, memory impairments, and is an alcoholic. and he said that we killed someone, but I don't really remember who it was. I think now with Rafal O's testimony, they can at least pinpoint the areas where it happened. So if Rafalo is confessing, he must have said at least at which lake it happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess the other thing is there's some controversy. I can't get it out my mouth today. There's some controversy about Rafal's testimony other than what you've immediately said, right? Because I guess if somebody um, was mentally disabled or handicapped, they might be able to they might be easier to coerce into a confession or confuse or just kind of bully and, you
Yeah,
know, almost brainwashed into saying whatever you want them to say, right?
exactly, exactly. And also, the case got published by the media pretty early on because it's a crazy case, and Poland was definitely looking at this. Everyone was kind of interested, right? Um, Now, Zbignev's mother then said to the press that that her son was a mythomniac who was obsessed with the Bible and, quote, was more of a coward than an aggressor. So Zbignev's mother is saying that. So I immediately sense a little bit of like the mother trying to, like, you know what I mean, only look at the, like, look through the rose colored lenses or whatever that saying is, you know what I mean, like only trying to see like the best in his big enough, because like, come on, you are hanging out with these weird individuals, drinking all the time. You know what I mean? Apparently, the bar owner of that fish bar in the town of Lasco, where, the men encountered the unidentified man, he said that the crowd was like rowdy, like the men were rowdy. So, I mean, it's not like this guy was like obsessed with the Bible, or at least at the time of this crime. So, I think Zbignev's mother's testimonies, um, I will say I find it a little bit hard to believe that he was like a devoted, Christian, but then also having like wild drinking parties.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that we can treat her as a truthful or reliable character witness for her son given that. Um, I had to look up what mythomaniac was.
Me too.
So it says I guess it makes sense, a mania for myth making. So, it was essentially a compulsion for making up outrageous lies. So that's interesting because that would describe a mentally ill person potentially, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, when journalists tried talking to Rafal O, remember the man who admitted his guilt, the man with like the mental impairments. When journalists tried talking to him, he allegedly closed the door shut in front of their faces, and then panicked. He was cursing the journalist, and he was saying that he never ate any human meat and that all of his testimonies were corrected by the police, meaning that police forced him to admit his guilt. And I mean, what do you think of that? What do you make of that? Him being mentally impaired, that would give the police an upper hand if they were trying to get a forced confession out of him.
Yeah, that's a common accusation by defendants, and I'm sure it's not always false. It does happen, where they can kind of beat or coerce or just go over it again and again where the person doesn't realize that they're free to leave.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, the person just, I mean, like if someone does that with you, and has, let's say, the legal ability to do that for, like, 2 days straight, how is anybody going to hold out under that? So I guess that's always the argument from the defendant's side. there's also kind of, I mean, there's numerous famous cases in the states where the convictions were overturned because I guess they could show that something had happened, where someone was coerced, essentially, or bullied into making a statement. I think that's also part of the reason why in the states we have that, like everyone's seeing on TV
Yeah.
now, where you ask for your lawyer, and then they can't bother you anymore, and your lawyer is going to be there for questioning. Um, so no, it's true. That's also, I think, what some of the same points, accusations people have made about, like, specifically, let's say, the Japanese legal system, because it has a very an overly high conviction rate. It's like a 94% conviction rate or something ridiculous like that. And they're saying, oh yeah, like they're just kangaroo courting people through the system, but a lot of times it's like coerced. That's the accusation, that's like coerced statements. So
Yeah.
that was why I guess I want to kind of rewind for a second, because I was taking pains to point out that I can't even say his name.
Zbigniew.
Yeah, I think you get nominated to say all these names because you live a lot closer,
Yeah.
to that part of the world. Um, yeah, I mean, I started making pains to point out that he might have a mental illness for exactly this reason. That it might be someone who's vulnerable, um, and who really isn't like all there, and certainly doesn't necessarily have the defenses. I mean, for his mom's big statement, maybe she's trying to say that he's just like a happy idiot out there drinking, the what is it, the Delphi Five?
Uh,
Not Delphi. Sorry, no, I'm getting my case mixed up. What's his name? The five guys that drove up into the mountains.
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Can't really recall at this point.
It's like when they were together, they could probably come off as like a just sort of a normal group of friends, that have everything together. But in reality, several of them had very serious deficits where they were, at least as mentally impaired as the guys in this case are being, it's, been alleged to have been.
You
So I guess that
you are referring to Yuba County 5.
Yuba County Five, yes, right. So yeah, the Yuba County Five. I mean, that's part of the big tragedy is it's guys that might be in a situation that exceeds their problem solving skills, I guess, at that point, or at least, normally they wouldn't have to deal with those challenges. I wonder, for these two guys, is it possible that this wild accusation gets made by somebody, because the guy that supposedly made it isn't even alive? So who knows how that happened? Like, has this whole thing been a sham? And now, one of the people who's dead was the guy who supposedly sent the email. His mom saying he was crazy, and then, which, she could also just lie because the whole thing's embarrassing. But then the other guy, what's his name, Rafal?
Yeah, Rafalo.
Yeah, yeah, he's like, also presumably, not all there. So, with that being said, I mean, how strong is this case all of a sudden
Yeah.
in a court of law? It's interesting because I feel like in the U.S. that might be enough to seriously undermine the case.
Yeah.
Along with along with some other key details you're about to get into.
Exactly. And I think that's also the case in Poland because the defendant's attorney believes they will beat this case. Now, because apparently he got sentenced, but there's still like some sort of a proceeding is still taking place. Because this case is, by the way, breaking. It's only like the newest developments happened like last month. I think the end of September, I believe. Now, let's jump to back to the story to finish up the rest of it, right? So after this whole incident happened with Rafal O like telling the media that it was all corrected by the police and he didn't eat any human flesh. um, the media actually went digging around, I would assume, the town of Lasko. There were also stories about Zbigniew talking and crying about the crime when he was drunk in local pubs. So he was definitely drunk in local pubs on a regular basis. So once again, Zbignev's mother's testimony is losing ground rapidly as we unravel this case. Right now, the daughter of the prime suspect Robert M feels devastated about the entire case. She doesn't believe that her father is a murderer or a cannibal. She said, quote, "Everything is based on some unreliable testimonies of a few drunkards," end quote. Now, Robert's children are now bullied in school because, quote, "their dad ate a human," end quote. I mean, these are like the little quotes we have here. Now, on the 27th of September 2021, Robert M., so end of September, really recently, like only a handful of weeks ago, Robert M. was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. So we only have murder. From what I'm gathering, only murder, right? So I have some more details. The first detail is that at the trial, which began this year and was Poland's first post war court case relating to cannibalism, lawyers for Robert M. and the other defendants argued that Raphael O.'s testimony could not be trusted as he has a mental illness, uh, also allegedly reported schizophrenia, and is an alcoholic. They also noted that no remains of the victim or any other physical evidence were ever discovered, and indeed the victim has never been identified. However, the district court in Szczecin found, Szczecin being the city where Robert M. works as a welder or used to work as a welder in the shipyard, found Robert M. guilty and sentenced him to 25 years as requested by the prosecutors. The judge, Thomas Banas, said that despite some inaccuracies in recalling events from 2 decades ago, Raphael O's testimony was indeed credible. Thomas Banas also noted that the defendants had been overheard by police making what appeared to be references to this crime in question. The court also found that the acts of cannibalism had taken place as part of a, quote, conspiracy of silence, end quote, to hide the crime. However, the other three men on trial were acquitted of violating a corpse because the statute of limitations for that crime had expired. The verdicts are not yet binding and can still be appealed by both defendants and prosecutors. And I think this is where the lawyers for Robert M. come in. So, yeah, dude, really quickly want to end. What I have here is that the other men were in fact acquitted, so only Robert M. is now sentenced to 25 years in prison. And as I've said, this case still has no victim or no corpse. So your thoughts on the case itself, and it's kind of interesting. I have my own opinions, but I want to hear yours first.
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of troubled by it because it's there's some things that seem to lean towards guilt, and then other things that make it probably legally problematic to try them for it without, I guess, a lot more evidence. So that's the one thing to me is they don't have a body. They don't have any. They don't know who's dead. They don't. You know what I mean? If someone's missing, why doesn't anybody know it or report it? But I mean, it is possible, right? It could be somebody, especially somebody that they treated like that. If they did, for someone to be treated like worse than a piece of trash, um, and just casually, maybe that is the kind of person who's so low in the rungs of society, so marginalized that they could go missing and nobody would know. just
Yeah.
like all the the people that go missing um, from violence, and they work in different industries where they're exposed to a higher degree of that kind of hazard to their life. But to give a guy 25 years to life without more proof is, I don't know, it's a little bit astounding to me. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think they did it? Like, I mean, regardless of whether there's proof or not,
Mm.
do you think that what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so my thoughts would probably. I want to address a few Reddit comments that I kind of relate to, right? Well, at least, I think one. So this is someone who commented on the Reddit post that, we got this idea to do this case from. And this is actually a very good point that I kind of strongly agree with. So this person on Reddit, user Opiate Lifer, says, this story is grade A horse shit. Anyone who has ever hunted knows how difficult it is butchering smaller animals, much less a human with no prior preparation. Unless they had a power source and a portable bone saw, it was it would take a lot of time to properly cook a human's worth of meat over a fire. And you're telling me five random friends were all cool with cannibalism? I don't believe a word of this, aside from maybe a guy was killed over a death and his body disposed in the woods. And I kind of strongly relate to this man or woman who commented on Reddit. I kind of think that when you really take a step back, like five random people all are okay with cannibalism, they all cannibalize this man, and I mean, I kind of see someone being killed here for sure, because they did give Robert M 25 years, but they didn't mention that, like, his sentence is for murder, it's not for cannibalism. And the other guys are released, so because the statute of limitations has expired for the desecration of a body. Now, I think that maybe the courts in Poland, or the court system, maybe believes that no cannibalism did take place. Maybe a murder over death did take place. I mean, in 2002 Poland, it's not as good of a country as 2021 Poland. It's definitely, like, Poland has definitely improved over the years, very much so. But back in the day, money was tight, especially, yeah, early thousands. Money was tight everywhere in this part of Europe. So I think I wouldn't put it out of the question, some people killing someone over money. Maybe it was an accidental kill, because you always hear stories of people, like, getting someone into a trunk and taking them out into the woods. Usually those things here end with someone just getting, like, a rough beating. You know what I mean? And that's pretty much how it ends. But maybe they took it too far and they accidentally maybe did too much damage where they killed this man, and they had to, dispose of his body. Now, the real mystery here is who the hell wrote the email to police, and why, in my opinion, why was the cannibalism angle attached to this case? Now, I see one reason, and that would be to maybe sensationalize this case more, to get it more public, more eyes on it. But then again, for what reason? I really don't know. I really don't know. I think the answer lies with the man or the woman who sent the email to law enforcement, because I don't believe that Zbigniew sent the email. He was dead. So whoever sent the email, it's a really big mystery. I hope that we will find out eventually. Yeah, so I think that would be my thoughts about this case.
Uh, I mean, what just to look at the thought process about it. I mean, they're not really five random guys, right? Because they're five 5 guys who are, I guess, friends or associates or something.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the real question is, because that would I guess help to see if there's, I mean, but there's smoke, there's fire. So is there any smoke? Like, what kind of guys were these? Were these guys actually like some kind of,
Yeah.
mafia or organized crime, or even unorganized crime?
Hmm.
Like Biff and his friends from the Back to the Future movies. Um, or the different iterations of Biff in those movies and his hangers on. So I guess, yeah, I mean, because I say this because when I was looking at um, modern cannibalism, but also like cannibalism over history, it's like, well, what makes people do this? So we already talked about the emergency situation. Um, Everybody runs out of food, and then like all the rules of society are already kind of out the window at that point. Um, okay, but that isn't this. So then there are situations where in the past cannibalism was like sometimes accepted, sometimes used as a tool or a weapon. Um, there's like ancient cultures, of course, where cannibalism meant something. It might be part of a human sacrifice, might be part of like a funeral rite. Um, that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. Now, the other aspects of cannibalism, especially in modern times, it's often used to essentially dominate an opponent. So, even for some of the tribal societies,
Hmm.
like in Papua New Guinea, sometimes you're doing it to like absorb like maybe a sense of like the person's spirit, or I mean, I'm not saying that's what is going on, but that's what the belief system is around, right? Like you even see this in some of the civil wars in Africa, or different kind of bush wars going on out there. Even in modern times, um, there are people that will like eat the heart of their enemies. So like one army will fight another. They'll capture or kill maybe a leading officer or a general, and then like yeah, the guy will eat his heart. Like, so this is where I'm saying this because sometimes it's kind of a public performance where someone's doing some form of cannibalism. Like I saw a video from some narcos where they literally, while this guy was alive, cut him open and cut out his heart and took a bite out of it. And that
Whoa.
was a couple things, right? That was mostly for show, right? But it's also he's doing it in front of his friends, and then they also have to participate in that. And then in the case of this case today, that's definitely everyone's accused of participating in some aspect of this. Is that the part where if it did happen, these other guys participated in it not because they want to eat another human being, not because they're hungry, not because they're looking for a new way to cook, a new recipe. They literally they're kind of stuck in like that game of like I guess trying to look tough for their friends. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not really a game. But maybe is that how drunk and how kind of like high on testosterone and toxic behavior and stuff between each other, and maybe how much dysfunction if they're able to get away with this for what 15 years and
Yeah.
nobody knew, like maybe that's how bad things had gotten. And maybe that's also like sometimes you see that with people. I know this is a long harangue, but I got a point. So sometimes you see with people where like that's the same kind of thing where like there's not strong authority. You see with I'll point out we see with kids that are badly behaved. It's interesting because sometimes, and not just children, but badly behaved people, sometimes they're almost asking for authority to smack them down. You know what I mean? Sometimes, I mean, I'm not saying smack down, but what I'm saying is like they're asking for authority to step in. They're saying, I think there should be rules here. I think there should be boundaries. You're not putting boundaries on me. I know I'm going real deep with this, but you know what I mean? And then they go do something worse and worse and worse. And then finally the system or somebody steps in, and by that time it's kind of too late. But it's almost like the person was asking for help 2 or 3 transgressions ago. And in the case of these guys, apparently they may have lived their whole lives and kind of either gotten over their problems or drank themselves half to death or whatever it was, developed mental illnesses, etc. and then all of a sudden the secret from the past comes up, if that's
Yeah.
what happened.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good point because if his big knife did write that email, then he must have had something on his chest. But then again, how can a dead man write an email? I mean, beats me, right? Now, dude, we're looking at an image here on the YouTube channel right now, and this apparently is the area where the fish bar was located. This is the picture of a street in Lasco, like that little town of Lasco. Now, this is not a bar. Apparently, I've read that the house on the left hand side was actually the bar essentially. So I'm not really sure, maybe this is the bar right here because you can see some sort of a structure behind these bushes right here, but apparently this is the road where it happened. And just to give a general feel to our audience who want to look at how this the scene looked like, you could quickly jump to the YouTube channel. Always you can peep what we're showing, dude. I think we talked about the area prior to recording this episode, and we both agree that this area looks like really like grim, gritty. You know what I mean? Like, look, man, like some more pictures. Like, look at this, man. Like, I mean, it's looks and this is like our favorite one, right? This picture right here.
It's all covered with water too. I can't help but wonder. A lot of times when they find bodies or things like that, sometimes it's because of positive soil conditions where maybe it's just dry, maybe there's not a lot of bacteria, maybe what I mean, in the desert, maybe there's just less things that are going to go, less elements, if something's buried in certain kinds of soil. This looks like it's just constantly water and bacteria and marsh and mud, and then it freezes up again for the winter, and then in the spring it all becomes mud again, and then the summer, you know what I mean, in summer it gets hot. That feels like a lot of. I mean, you tell me, what are the roads like where you live? Like, how often do they have to repair them?
Oh, often, all the time. Roads have holes in them like everywhere.
Which is crazy because to me, that's not the case. Like, I don't get a ton of weather where I live. I mean, I've seen rain. Don't get me wrong. Here in Los Angeles, I've seen rain wreck, just like tear suburban roads in half, but it's still pretty rare. Like for me, I almost never run into a bad pothole, because as I understand it, a place like that with a lot of moisture and rain and snow and then thawing out again, that like roads and pretty much everything. I mean, imagine if a road is going to fall apart from that kind of wear and tear, what's going to happen to a body that isn't being preserved in mud, because the mud might actually help it,
Yeah.
right? But if it's sitting someplace where the elements are just going to drag it along a river, maybe at the other end of that lake, and who knows what else, just a lot of stuff going on. And then half the time, that lake, does that lake freeze over? So is there a period where where nothing's even, um I don't
Yeah.
know, you know what I mean, is there a period where,
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Just really
yeah.
want to quickly say that I'm pretty sure, even though it's like, yeah, it's like in the northern, west northern part you know, essentially Poland. So it's like the geography is like very similar to where I'm from, and yeah, lakes here completely freeze during winter.
Yeah, I believe it. So yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of wear and tear and a lot of things that get in the way of finding a body. And then every year when water comes and fills up that, or whatever's doing to whatever's happening to keep the water level in that lake,
Yeah.
from evaporating away,
Hmm.
well, I mean, that's just adding more and more sediment too, right? So that's how things get stuck under mud, is that more mud washes in from the surrounding land and lays another layer on top of it. So a body could be under there, and the problem is it might never get found because stuff keeps these layers of basically dirt carpet, mud under the water getting laid on top of it.
Exactly. I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts about how this man, Robert M., got 25 years in prison when there isn't a body, there isn't even a name of the witness, the victim, there isn't. It seems like no one even knows what happened. Like, I think what we need to like still talk about is what the police have in this case. So they have a conversation of the men conspiring not to talk about something. We don't know about what, apparently. Also, we have an email from a dead man who is dead 6 months even before the email is sent. We have a case of cannibalism that is very difficult to do, apparently, but we do have Raphael O's roommate's testimony that Raphael O brought him some meat. So I'm thinking, is Raphael O's roommate the key detail here? Don't you think?
Yeah, I would be really curious to know what the meat specifically tasted like and how much other meats. I mean, I've never had rabbit meat, so I don't know what that tastes like. I only say that because when I was doing the research, there was a journalist who wasn't into this. He'd done it for actual journalistic purposes. He'd gone down to, like, I don't know, a hospital where someone had just died in New York, and they they cleanly, with sanitized practices, cut off, like procured a piece of meat from, like, someone who had just died, and then he cooked it, which is, it's disgusting, I know, but he cooked it, and he said it tasted a lot like veal. So I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to see what that roommate said, because that, like I don't expect that the roommate is like a just judging by the other people in the story. I don't expect that the roommate is like a really cultivated person necessarily, who would have a lot of different kinds of fine cooking. So veal's sort of a weird little, high end meat that's sort of niche, and not everybody eats it or tries it. So I was kind of curious, like if he just maybe it tasted just not enough like you said, rabbit or chicken or beef or whatever it was he was used to.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a picky eater.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Now, jumping back to the prospects of Robert M. becoming a free man again, would you think that this individual has a high chance of beating this case? I personally think that Robert M. should be this case. Like, unless there's something that the court and like the police are holding to themselves, and I'm sure we're gonna have some more details about this case, but the way it's looking now, from what I've read so far on this case, it doesn't look to me like they have enough to keep him in prison for a long time. Like, there is no body, so I think, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't. From what I'm seeing right now, I don't think that they're gonna be able to keep him in jail. I think he may be able to get out of jail, and also if he does, I think he can sue the Polish government for a lot of money now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it almost makes you wonder if the judge, because you made the comment that the judge seemed like, I don't know, overly jovial or too, maybe not serious enough. It makes you wonder if there's a political reason for, let's say, the people involved on the government side to make it happen, even though they know it might get overturned later, just to advance their careers or otherwise get publicity that would help their careers.
And yeah, at this point, I think we've covered this case, at least on my end. I think I've talked about everything that I wanted to talk about this week. Do you have anything else to add? Because I didn't really check your notes necessarily, so I wouldn't want to go past.
Yeah, I've tried to weave them in here. It's a it's such a weird off kilter thing. I can't help but wonder too if there's like a moral panic aspect to this. So I'll give you an example. There's kind of a fascination sometimes, from even like law enforcement. People will say, "Oh my gosh, there's a bunch of Satanists doing stuff," and it's like, well, okay, this isn't to say that there haven't been people who have done crimes under that label, but there was a period in it happens every so often in U.S. history. For instance, in the 80s, there was a huge court case here in Los Angeles, of all places, not a place that's really associated with or I think it was Los Angeles. Not a place associated with a lot of like really conservative religious beliefs necessarily,
Mhm.
compared to like the Midwest. But there was like a whole huge, famous trial called the McMartin trial that had just crazy accusations from the prosecutors based on these things that kids had supposedly said to under hypnosis. Things that were ridiculous. Things that really looking back were kind of ridiculous, but because it had essentially like a Satanism hook to it, it kind of took a life of its own and seems to have drummed up fears in people that um, I don't know, kind of get them overly excited about it. So I always wonder if it's the same thing with this because Europe, Northern Europe, other than like I said, the stuff that happened during war and famine, ritual cannibalism is not something that's been around at least in pretty recent history. Going back, I mean, I think one of the things for Europe that I saw said like 14,000 years ago, they found a place that looked like a lot of cannibalism was going on in this one cave. But it's not something that they find as much as they do in other cultures. So I can't help but wonder if this story becomes almost like the boogeyman for Northern Europeans, where it's salacious, the story caught fire. Somebody sent an email pretending to be a guy who is dead. And then all of a sudden all these other guys are getting dragged in. I'm not saying they didn't do something to more than one somebody. I don't know if the cannibalism thing is real. I would believe that they beat up and killed somebody or more than one somebody. And maybe that's the real thing. Maybe that's the real um, secret they're hiding is that they did do like some dirty stuff. But then this cannibalism thing has apparently wrecked their social life, like wrecked their families' lives in terms of like how they engage with the society there, right? Because they're
Yeah,
just totally, they're pariahs now. So
yeah,
yeah, it's a fascinating case. Yeah, so it reminds me of different things, but it certainly is unique in its own way.
yeah, for sure. Like, this is one of the more unique cases. I still keep coming back to that meat that was brought by Rafal O to his roommate. Like, apparently, some sort of a meat was brought, but the man, Rafal, had mental impairments and was an alcoholic. I assume even back then, so who knows, right? So yeah, guys, this week we had a pretty interesting case, a little bit of an unusual case, but I just ran into it. Really wanted to do an episode on this. I hope everyone appreciated the lesser known case this week. And it's Poland, rural Poland, something different a little bit. But yeah, next week we'll be back, I think, to a closer case, to maybe where Glenn lives potentially. We'll see. And yeah, for this week, I really hope that everyone will have a great rest of the week. We were happy to bring you another interesting mystery, lesser known mystery, for instance, and we will catch you on the next week's episode. But for now, guys, just please stay safe and peace out.